The transformation brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic globally across all industries is likely to continue. While EduTech and online teaching and learning became more prominent in the education sector, both the strengths and weaknesses of online education have been exposed. As the world moves out of the shadows of the pandemic, a blended learning model is most likely to emerge and last into the future. The technological trends most likely to shape the face of education include artificial intelligence, hybrid course models, data-driven student analysis, open education resources, quality virtual learning, big data, blockchain, gamification, robotics, and the Internet of Things and 3D printing.
So lots of technologies there that are transforming the face of education. Question is, how many of them are applicable for an African setting? And we're going to get into that discussion in just a short while. And let us meet our panel who will be taking us through that very important talk.
Dan Atkins, Group CEO of the Transnational Academic Group, Dr. Felix Panganai, founder and director at the Windsor School of Excellence in Science and Technology in Zimbabwe, Miles Thies, director of Digital Learning Services at i4 Corp, Dean McCaubrey, founder at My Social Life. The moderator is Fifi Peters, anchor at CNBC Africa.
Well, jumping straight into the discussion. Gentlemen, good afternoon. I mean, you all have quite a lot in common, aside from your gender. You guys all have a very strong background, not only in education, but also in technology. And I think that it will frame the discussion that we are about to have quite nicely. Dan, can I begin with you? A nice catch-up between us. It has been about a year or so since we last spoke at this summit last year, I believe. I'm just interested in how the experience for you has been in the past year. I mean, we're now a lot more familiar with how the world has changed, 3 waves into this pandemic, and we've got a bit of an idea of where things are going, although uncertainties still remain. But what has been your experience and the experience of your institution in the past year?
Fifi, it's great to speak to you again after a year. And the past 18 months has been really interesting in operating both the Curtin University campus in Dubai as well as the Lancaster University campus in Ghana. Both countries went into a lockdown around March of last year, and from that point on, we have been teaching primarily in a completely online mode. Even when we have tried to reopen the campuses for face-to-face studies, students have opted for online. And one thing that we have seen is there is a great difference between the different types of online learning. And the only one that we have found that is satisfactory to our students and is producing educational outcomes equal to pre-pandemic face-to-face classes is having teacher-led, fully interactive online classes where it is exactly the same as what the teacher would have been doing on campus, except it's mediated by technology. So it's not pre-recorded, it's done live, questions and answers going back and forth constantly, and use of simulations to replace things that we normally would have done in the classroom.
Kind of like a Zoom session.
Yes, like a Zoom session. So instead of a webinar where it is one directional, it is fully interactive. So the students are being asked questions and having to respond, which makes sure that they're actually participating. And the teacher is available to answer student questions and clarify things. They're able to break students out into small group breakout rooms for discussion where they can monitor what's going on and ensure that the students are working through the case properly and give them feedback and things like that. That is the only thing that we found that satisfies the students, and we've been able to demonstrate at both campuses that the academic results using that method have been equal to, or in some cases better than, the academic results that were being achieved in face-to-face classes pre-pandemic.
That is quite interesting. But Dr. Felix, perhaps you can give us your perspective of what has happened at your institution, WesTech. Has it been the same for your students who may not have been able to attend the campus physically, that there was in actual fact a preference for online learning even when they could attend?
Thank you very much for that question. We did, I think, we went into lockdown last year around March, end of March. And fortunately for us, because we founded the school as a fully digital school, meaning to say that all our resources, textbooks and everything, we opted for digital books, no printed text at all. When we started in 2015, which sounded crazy at the time because the country was going through some difficulties in terms of availability of energy. We were having blackouts quite often, but we just persevered. We said, well, we will find alternatives, to continue on this platform. So when the lockdown came, actually, we didn't experience much disruption as many other traditional schools that are founded on traditional methods of delivery. So, but the challenge was with our students because they had to find access to their online resources. So for us, it was just a natural transition from absence of face-to-face interaction to going on to the interaction via the online learning. And we did use the WhatsApp platform as our communication platform and as our entry or as our gateway. So we blended the use of WhatsApp with Google Class, which most of our teachers were not quite familiar with, but we were quick to get onto that platform, and we trained ourselves on how to get our way around the Google Class. But we also blended that with Zoom, although there were challenges on availability of data. So what we did was the teachers could have pre-recorded short lessons on Zoom, which they then share with the teachers with the students on WhatsApp, and then they can invite the students back to Zoom or to Google Class. And in that way, it was, of course, there was a learning curve for that particular period. But because lockdown is extended up to this period now, we just went into lockdown a month ago. But at this stage, we had become very, very agile and robust in terms of how we navigate our way on the online learning.
And Dr. Felix, how would you describe the educational outcomes of that way of learning? Has your experience been similar to that of Dan, in which some of the results of your students produced in this time on a digital learning platform like Zoom and the WhatsApps have been the same or even better than the way that learning was conducted previously?
Well, it was a mixed reaction. Our system was so good to the extent that I think it does resonate very well with what Dan said. When we were supposed to come back for the physical school in September, the parents opted to stay online up to the end of the year, when the rest of the country was going back on, to the face-to-face school. And in terms of results, we had our exam class because we have our what we call our O levels here, which is the middle high school. They were having their exams in November of last year. And the performance was very good, but it was very difficult to say whether this was a result of the way that we were delivering. But of course, we do feel that there was a gain by the students because the use of the online learning platform, and particularly the way we were assessing students through the Google Forms, which gives a very good analytics tool, where you can see where, it's basic but very fantastic, analytical tool that you can actually use to inform the progress that the students are making. So yes, but of course, the main challenge was, of course, availability of data on the part of the students. But in terms of the learning gains that the students made during that period, it continues to grow actually, because obviously we even when we returned to the face-to-face physical school, we continued with the online learning,
right,
by way of provision for remedials and other supplemental learning for the students.
All right. The challenge that you do cite, Dr. Felix, is a challenge, in fact, that has come out quite prominently throughout the session for today, and perhaps the rest of the panel can have a think about that in the context of South Africa and Africa, in fact, as a whole, about overcoming the challenge of data that's an impediment to connectivity. But Miles, just to bring you in here, I imagine that you're going to tell me that the experience of the Eiffel Corp was similar to that of WestTech, in that the institution has been run digitally, and therefore the adjustment to COVID-19 may not have been as disruptive or as difficult as it was for other traditional institutions. But just give us a sense of your experience of teaching and learning in the past year.
Thanks, Vivi. So yeah, I wish I could say that it was a great experience, and unfortunately we don't have a homogeneous experience across all the different institutions that we work with. So if you had to speak to any higher education or teacher, you'll find that a lot of them, it wasn't an easy adjustment for them initially to the massive shift to online learning that quickly, and many of them are almost at a point of burnout. I think we've learned a lot of lessons. A lot of them have learned to kind of pick up the strain and kind of cope with the challenges now. But certainly in that first year to 9 months, the shift that was required for that online learning to take place was relatively significant. I think in some respects, the COVID and the pandemic that it brought about was, for many in the EdTech sector, they were thought, well, this is really our moment to shine. This is really to kind of prove the case that technology can resolve many of the challenges around access and capability and potentially engagement that are typically lacking in traditional learning programs. But I think we quickly saw that it takes a lot more than just pieces of technology in order to be able to really create a successful learning experience, bring people and pull them through a program, and then obviously help them achieve those skills, all within the sort of original framework that we envisioned. So we're still going through that to some respect, but I think certainly the education sector, from schools level all the way through to corporate learning, higher education, a lot of growing up has been done, a lot of experimentation has happened, and I think we've seen that traditional models of teaching and learning, obviously it really struggled to cope with the challenges required by the pandemic, and a lot of that thinking can now inform what happens in future. Which is obviously really good from the perspective of all educators, because those lessons will now inform specifically things like, where do we spend our money? How do we actually get the greatest benefit out of the technology that we apply? And how do we redevelop the programs that we are presenting, again, whether it be at schools, at universities, within corporates and in industry, so that they kind of meet the needs of those people in those programs and meet the needs of all the different stakeholders, those being, the students as well as industry as well.
Exactly. Thanks so much for that honest response there, Miles. And I think the message that stood out quite boldly for me was the fact that it is still a work in process at this stage. But to bring you in, Dean, good afternoon. And just final opening thoughts from you, sir. In terms of this push that we have seen towards EdTech, in your experience over the past year or so, what has worked, what hasn't worked so well?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on board. Look, we are an external, so we actually offer a service of teaching online safety and digital life skills in the schools. So what's happened is we've actually been almost on the outside liaising and working and communicating with the kids about their life and their life skills during the pandemic and during e-learning. And it's been really, really fascinating, because I think what's really interesting is I would agree with I think it was Miles, that look, it wasn't a smooth process at all. But I think kudos to all the teachers that they managed to really pull it off. And I think, you know, to Daniel's point, that there have been some really great results. However, as humans, we're all incredibly different. You know, that's really the challenge here. And this is a three-legged stool, education now. It's one leg is education, the teaching. The other one is now technology, i.e. EdTech. And the other one is humanity. How are we feeling in the spirit of the environment without our friends and so on? And I think that often we are talking about learning outcomes, but we need to understand the impact of the human outcomes as well. Because I think with EdTech, we can really push forward and we can get those results. But I also feel like we might be dropping the ball around certain soft skills and the importance of things like exercise, kindness, compassion, face-to-face, all of these things. These are incredible. They actually will be the catalyst to work with technology later on. And I think, my big point is, I think we've done well. I think it hasn't been easy. I think the kids have done well. Huge dibs to the teachers and to the owners of these education institutions. But I really believe we're missing a huge trick, because we keep still looking at test results and exam results, yet I'm seeing and getting feedback from thousands of students about their mental well-being and what's happening with their friends, and the consumption of media, fake news, disinformation, increased screen time. So have we given them the regulation tools to be able to step in and out of e-learning, in and out of socializing, and so on? It's a heck of a complex balance, but I love it.
I'd love to know what the kids have been saying that you've been talking to about their experience in the online learning space over the past year. I mean, you do raise a very important issue around mental health and mental wellness, which has grown in prominence over this past year. But what have the kids said about being on the other side of the laptop?
100%. It's a great question. At the end of November, we did a survey. It was only into 3 schools. We got a sample of 265 answers to 10 questions. And we asked them which of our 8 modules, 8 lessons that we have around digital life skills. So that is privacy and security, digital footprint, digital identity, sexuality online, and so on. And we asked them, which is the #1 lesson you would like right now? 31% chose mental health, being the leader. Number 2 at 20% was focus and attention. There's a direct correlation there to the noise inside our heads that comes with a life lived online. And we work with a brains trust of cognitive therapists, neuroscientists, sexologists, privacy advocates. And we are in this, because we offer this octagonal prism to a child's life online, everything from security to sexuality to identity to opportunity, to actually digital excellence and digital exploration. We are hearing from all these experts their own individual views, but we're sitting in the middle going, wow, this is fascinating. If only they could hear what they were saying, and if only they could hear what the kids are saying. And I really feel like we're stuck in the middle of this incredible puzzle at the moment at My Social Life. I think it is not a straight line. I think we've done well with e-learning. But I mean, look, even in terms of, for example, learning methods, if we look, so many clues lie in the way that they consume media, apps and games. It's all right there. And the level of excitement and inspiration and motivation and what makes them click. There's so many clues right there, right in front of us. But we need to try and keep up with that. And that's what's hard for teachers, is that they're tired. And so that is the piece, is that we need to be attuned to their world, but we also need to have real energy and passion. And we need to use some of the more modern tools to teach them. And we need to touch base with who they are as humans. It's so complex.
And I think that you do introduce a very critical element to this conversation of EdTech and e-learning, and that is ensuring that the balance of soft skills, interacting, and just the humanity aspect of it is also maintained. And I think it lends itself to the theme of blended learning and the hybrid learning systems, which we'll probably touch on throughout the discussion. But let's get into these exciting new technologies that are transforming the face of education as we see it, as we know it. On the continent. Dan, what is topping your list in terms of the technologies that are exciting you the most at this stage in the learning process?
Actually, it might be a surprise to people, but really the ability to do the kind of online fully interactive learning that we've been doing has been a big one for me, as well as the ability to do simulations. We do simulations, for example, for engineering, since people were not able to come in and work with equipment. Much of the other technology that's coming along really falls on the Gartner hype curve. And I think Tom Bennett, the prior speaker, put it pretty well in his 2015 OECD report, showing that the schools or the school systems that were scoring the highest in the world on the PISA test also had the lowest use of technology in the classroom. Finland, Singapore being two examples there. So much of what is being pushed in EdTech right now, things like AI and gamification, are great if you are getting students to learn their first math facts, for example. You have to memorize the multiplication tables. Yes, you can learn it from first principles, but ultimately you need to memorize it. And gamification works great with that. But when you are getting into secondary school and university, when we're talking about learning skills that have to be applied and that involve interaction with other human beings, there is no AI that has ever been developed that can deal with that. There is no gamification, because in order to judge whether somebody is making a proper application, especially if you're allowing for out-of-the-box lateral thinking like Edward de Bono talked about, it won't fit in any predetermined answer or algorithmically determined answer. So we're hearing so much about this kind of ed tech, and it's got its place, but by the time you get to secondary school, and certainly by the time you get to university, most of it just is not fit for purpose. And coming out of more than 20 years in the IT industry and having experience with AI, I can tell you it probably won't be fit for that purpose for the foreseeable future.
Sure. Quite an interesting view there. Dr. Felix, your thoughts? I mean, we've seen quite a lot of innovations happening in this space in the past 12 months, 14, 15 months or so, as the education space has been one of those last sectors to really be disrupted by technology. But with the innovations that have come out, so which ones have interested you the most, and which ones do you think could be quite applicable for your students in Zimbabwe?
Well, we operate in the secondary school space, and so our focus mainly looks at the technologies that enable the delivery in the teaching and learning, and for us mainly it's technologies that have to do with assessment tools. I did mention earlier on, I mean, it can sound naive, but I did mention earlier on about, the use of, Google Forms, for example, to provide assessment and to track student progress. I know, within the greater scope of assessment, you speak of big data and how can be used to improve student performance and the like. But I think the secondary school space is slowly probably also moving towards the use of big data in that sense. but I'm more concerned about the technologies that enable teaching and learning to take place. And simplistically, I'll tell you that the blending of the change that the application of WhatsApp or social media, as it were, which I think at the moment, I think we have got almost about 4.32 billion people using the social media space. And most of it now increasingly is being used for education. And so in our experience, what we have been doing, as I mentioned before, is a teacher records a lesson on Zoom, which they then share with the students on WhatsApp to mitigate for those students who find it hard to connect to live lessons on Zoom. And that alone has created a phenomenal impact on the learning experience for the students, because when they use a pre-recorded lesson that's running on WhatsApp, which has got low data consumption, they can play that video over and over. Is the voice of the teacher, is the teacher explaining, and if they've got any questions that they have, then they can text the teacher through WhatsApp that, can you explain this point? And the teacher can. And these are very practical solutions that we are seeing emerging within our space here in Africa. So, of course, there are high-sounding bites about, the technologies that are finding. And some of those, unfortunately, they probably might not actually have much impact on the African space, because, as we said before, we are struggling with the basics of which are the basic technologies that we can actually apply to make learning happen within our space. So I would say for me, it's mainly been WhatsApp, Zoom, and the Google Class, and of course within the Google Class, the experience of the use of the assessment tool, which is the Google Forms.
I must say, Dr. Felix, you've got very disciplined secondary students there. I can tell you of a number of secondary students I've engaged with who, when they have been on their phone or on WhatsApp, it hasn't been to listen to their teacher lecture over and over again. It's been to do other things. Perhaps you need to share the playbook with us there. But Miles, just your comment as we stay on this theme about the technologies that we should be excited about. And just adding to that, we should be excited about the technologies that will actually help reach the presently unreachable and those who actually cannot afford to access these technologies at the current rate.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to continue to be the question. We need to resolve that access dilemma as well as the device dilemma. We need that kind of, to eliminate those barriers of inequality that exist, so that, within those environments, then all these new innovations can really kind of flourish, because that's what we really need. Just in terms of the next kind of technologies, I think I agree with Daniel and Felix. Datafication I think that's definitely a significant trend that we will see more increase of. It has been around for some time, but I think certainly a lot more educators have been exposed to its capabilities, and I think we'll see a lot more institutions investing in what they can do with that and what they learn about their learners as well. Also, I think in terms of remote assessment capabilities, obviously there's a necessity in place at the moment. The academic years and programs need to continue. So, we work with one particular partner who's enabling that and has a very specific and innovative approach to doing that. So I think those types of solutions definitely will come to the forefront as well. Yes, there's also, I think, a lot of institutions have kind of dropped back from the sort of techno-romanticism that existed for a long time. That, again, technology is the panacea that's going to be able to resolve a lot of our issues. And, they're putting in place these solutions that are potentially going to solve all these challenges. But I think, as Dr. Duggan made the point earlier, that this contextualization around the challenges that exist for certain institutions, the context, you talk about the data access issues. That's a really real, very lived experience for a lot of African students. So we need to be able to kind of overcome that challenge. And then educators need to move to the point where they're actually deciding what's right for them, for their context, for their institutions, and ultimately for the stakeholders, those students. And I think that's going to come from a lot of sort of internal reflection around how successfully they've managed to deal with the pandemic, the things they've put in place to try and resolve the challenges they've experienced there, and then into the future, obviously sharing a lot more information, understanding what they can do with the budgets they have and the support that they get from government. Maybe there's sort of rethinking around the overarching strategy that institutions and both governments have as well. And it is within that context that we can then enable more educators to kind of critically analyze and think very hard about the right type of technologies that are going to be in place. I mean, I think innovation, as we've seen, it's happening, even faster. There are even, greater sense of offerings available and technologies that can apply. But I think it's really, really important that it has to be given to teachers who have the right kind of skills to be able to apply them in the right way. And I think the leadership in those institutions and across, every single region around the world, particularly for Africa, is enabled to understand what they're going to do for their learners and that they should really make the best use of them.
I think I'll stay on the point that you've just discussed, Miles, regarding connectivity, because I mean, we can talk about all these wonderful technologies until the chickens come home. I think that's the saying, but nonetheless, I think the point is received. We can talk about these technologies, but if we don't have enough of these technologies in the hands of the young people that need them, we're talking over our heads. And at the same time, beyond the devices, if there isn't that connectivity and that consistent data, Dr. Felix, you mentioned even consistent power supply, then again, I mean, it's working with solutions right now that are not applicable in an African context. So can I ask the panel to share their thoughts and their views from the various lenses in which they have come in with this conversation on addressing the issue of connectivity. Dean, would you lead us in here? The issue of connectivity and inclusivity, your thoughts on how we can best deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was going to say great panel because all of these points are really so valid. And I think it's very easy for us to get stuck in the emerging tech and the innovations, but actually we have a problem with basic access, basic education and inclusion. So that's really where we are as a continent and as a country. So, there have been really amazing things. There are things which are either being offered and created by educators and technologists, something like there's a gentleman called Dylan at Win-Win, and they are offering almost like a little set-top box that you would get your TV signal for. And inside that has all of these courses, but it also has a little, I don't know how it works, but some type of Wi-Fi signal that allows it to be sent to the various students to be shared and also to be able to be put up on a screen. So it's almost like a Wi-Fi signal and the curriculum inside a box, and it keeps being sent. So it can go to rural villages and just act as like a one-size-fits-all connection and curriculum teaching pack. It's super clever. But let's look at something that, say, wasn't built by somebody that's tried to innovate something new. There's a global app, for example, Share It. It's 1.8 billion downloads. I think it's 500 million monthly users, comes out of Singapore, has been very large around the world. That offers zero data sharing. Now in India, for example, that means that people can actually transfer the curriculum or the specific exercises or the videos, and this is key for learning, that the videos can be transferred at zero data. And that's just an app. It's specifically more of an Android app than an iOS app, but still that serves the larger majority. So something like Share It's been really, really good as well. And I suppose that's the first part of it. So either people that are making the ability to give access and inclusion, or perhaps things that you can buy off the shelf or the app store, that's another thing. But I think a missing piece that we haven't really discussed is that's great, but what happens around the teachers, the instructors? Who are the instructors inside the EdTech? Who are the instructors inside the school, the rural school? Who's helping them? Who's giving them the teaching tools? For example, we teach teachers and parents and students and psychologists because we believe those are the four groups that will catch the student in one way or the other in the area that we work, which is different to everybody else. But I do think it's really important. Like, one of the most basic innovations is an incredible teacher that is passionate. So yeah, I'll stop talking.
Agreed. Agreed, and I think that would be very welcomed, particularly in the households of our parents who have had to kind of put a teaching hat on. And yeah, teaching hasn't been their passion. Parenting, perhaps, yeah, definitely. But just to get back to the seriousness and the focus of this, the issue of connectivity and inclusivity, and also the issue that Dean did raise regarding you making sure that the teachers are also part of this educational process. Dan, your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think that connectivity is a huge issue. We definitely experienced it more at our campus in Ghana than we did at our campus in Dubai, where high-speed internet access is the normal situation. We were really blessed in Ghana that Vodafone stepped up and allowed us to specify certain IP addresses that were for the university and zero rated all the data to that IP address, which allowed us to do our teaching online without the students having to pay for data or use up their data. So that kind of corporate charity was hugely important in helping students get through the pandemic, but that's not the ultimate answer. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good start. Because governments and society have determined, rightly so, that universal education is a greater good and a social good, I really believe that governments and taxpayers, especially corporate taxpayers, should contribute to a fund that provides data access for all students from kindergarten all the way through completion of the university so that they can participate in online learning activities, whether it's from their mobile phone or their laptop, at no cost to themselves, because the benefit back to society is going to far exceed the cost.
Agreed. I mean, you're calling it a corporate charity. The panel that I discussed this issue of closing the skills gap and ensuring that the education process was more inclusive called it corporate responsibility. And Dr. Felix, I'd like to get your thoughts here. Is the private sector taking a lot more responsibility in this process of ensuring that all these wonderful technologies that do emerge are accessible to all the students that want to enter your institutions? Is the private sector got a bigger role to play here, and how do they? Is the contribution to a fund perhaps even the solution, as Dan has indicated?
Yeah, I think I share the same thoughts with those expressed by Dan. The corporate social responsibility, I thought couldn't have become much more needed at this point, particularly during the pandemic. We did see, I think one of our local providers here, they did provide data packages for students, but whilst they were really helpful in my opinion, but I just felt that they could have gone a little bit further than what they did. But also, if there was a sort of a concerted effort by all players within the telecoms space that have got access to provision of data, if they come together and create some kind of a provision for the students, both in the private education and in the public schools. And as we speak at the moment, that's the biggest challenge here in Zimbabwe, because the students don't have access to. So most of the students that are in government schools, most of them are not having access to learning at the moment. They wait for that time when schools are physically opened. And I just think that we could do better. I mean, if like Dan said, if the government on the other side would come together with the private sector to put their hands together to try and do something to make sure that students have got access to. I'm beginning to think, as somebody who runs a tech school, I'm beginning to think that access to data should actually be made a human right like water, because this is, I mean, all these kids, they're digital natives, and we're talking of digital natives globally, but we still have got very much limited access in most parts of the world, where students have got no access to, to basic data for them to have access, to education. So yes, I do feel that the corporate sector and the government, they've got a big role in trying to break this this barrier of access to data by all the kids that are of school going age.
We actually have a question that has come through from the audience, Miles, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to answer it for us as we begin to wrap up this discussion. My director has said that, can you please be brief? Time has fast gone away from us. But the question is, Miles, what would be the best way to leverage and translate live streaming learning experiences for offline platforms? I'm hoping you got that.
Yes, it is. So, I mean, there are a number of different tools that, institutions can use. There's a number of online subscription tools that are also available to do that. But obviously, these things cost money. So I think institutions really need to think about how they're going to fund that, and then obviously how they integrate that into their learning programs as well. So, I mean, YouTube does have kind of versions of that where you can download, specific videos you want as well. And there's other specific tools as well that enable you to upstream and then videos onto the internet, and then also download for your use as well. So I mean, I think just any quick Google search will reveal the number of different service providers, and then institutions need to kind of just work out what's relevant for them, and again, who they actually needing to provide that for. We're talking about data, so I think one significant consideration is that the learning experience for many African students is inherently mobile. And oftentimes we're applying, very fancy tools with, that we need big budgets for, but don't necessarily suit the needs of the end user. So I think that's a critical piece of thinking that needs to be applied. If you're going to be applying a tool like that, you really, really need to think very carefully about who the people are that are going to be consuming that, so that they have the best chance of obviously being able to use it, and then it becomes valuable to them.
Well, thanks so much for that response, and it does bring us to the end of this particular discussion, a very important discussion, and it has been quite comforting to hear the excitement about all the technologies that have been used across your various institutions. It has also been quite notable to hear that the outcomes haven't been the same across the board, and it has mainly been as a result of the different levels of access that students have to these technologies, which is certainly a point that does need to be addressed. Who leads it? Is it the private sector taking a lot more responsibility as opposed to charity? Is it governments also edging the private sector a lot more into this direction with perhaps a more favorable environment for them to invest? Whoever it is, or if it is a case of all stakeholders being on board, it certainly does need to happen at a very, very quick pace, because this inequality gap that we have witnessed over the past year certainly cannot continue to expand in the wrong direction if we are going to bring social stability onto this continent. But with that said, I'd like to thank you guys for your participation. That was Dan Atkins, the Group CEO of Transnational Academic Group, Dr. Felix Panganai, the founder and director of the Windsor School of Excellence in Science and Technology in Zimbabwe, Miles Thies, the director of Digital Learning Services at the Eiffel Corp, as well as Dean McCaubrey, founder of My Social Life.